Welcome to my tutorial on this Spinning Glow Fractal patch. So I've created this little patch here that just does some random mirroring and some fractal generation. Nothing crazy here, just wanted to kind of give a quick rundown as to how this is working. This is what it looks like here. As you can see, it just cycles through and it should go in a sense kind of back in on itself. I believe there is a sine wave if I'm not mistaken. Oh, I apologize. It will not because it's on accumulate. Accumulate is just a random number that just keeps on generating. There's no real issue here because this could generate for quite a long time before you'd really even run into any issues. And I don't foresee anybody ever running a patch long enough to really have that be a problem, or at least that's what that's my understanding, is that it would take a great deal of time in order for this to accumulate so long. But in any case, I kind of digress. That's a different subject for a different day. For today, we're going to talk about fractal noise and how we took this fractal noise here and created this red and blue and turquoise purple kind of mess here. So what I've done is I've created this little pattern. What I did here, the first things first, was to take the fractal noise. I set it to Perlin because I like Perlin. Perlin is a noise that has a value that is it's a very interesting kind of thing. Ken Perlin, I believe, is his name. Correct me if I'm wrong. Ken Perlin created this noise that has a smoothing technique that's very interesting. So when you usually have like a random noise is nothing more than a random number. So in the grand scheme of things, that's what it really is. So when you have a random number chosen by a computer, it'll go 1 to 15, 36, 42, 100, 256, 3, and it randomly generates a number that is just, the numbers they can be very close together or they can be very far apart. With Perlin noise, however, it's a little bit different. There's a bit of a smoothing going on there, so your numbers will be more in line and closer to each other. They can still reach to those lower numbers. However, those lower numbers are not reached instantaneously. They gradually bring themselves to those numbers. Using a Perlin noise, you'll get something that's more like 18, 24, 29, 32, 34, 38, 49, 52, and it'll be a gradual change versus a very large change. With Perlin, you can also you can change the values so that it's even closer in range. Like you have the ability to kind of set a floor and a ceiling. So that's one of the reasons why I like the Perlin noise over the other noises. Although the other noises do very similar things. Value noise, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is very similar to it. The same thing with simplex. It has a kind of a different algorithm, but it's the same premise behind the scenes. Don't quote me on that, but for the most part, I don't see a great deal of change, other than you'll notice there's more whites here and darks. Perlin noise is my favorite. I have a very long storied history with Perlin noise as far as, Photoshop. There was all kinds of different things. Cloud noise is very similar to the Perlin noise. But in any case, that's a little bit of information about how fractal noise works. You have a series of different options within your fractal noise. You have the option to have your modifier. You can set to absolute, you can set it to sin, which is just a different way of working those noise. It's a modifier with it. You also have the option to change you could put in channel colors, for instance. So it's set to straight black and white right now, but you can set it to the green, white, and purple, which is 3 colors. And then you can also set it to the RGB values. So that's one of the nice things about fractal noise. Your gain is your brights and your blacks, or you basically can set your gain higher so that you can get a higher value like we've been talking about. Your octaves are like the noise within the noise, I guess you could say, right? So it's the granular clouds. You'll notice that inside the clouds here, let me make this a little bit bigger here for you. You'll notice that inside the clouds now, there seems to be a little bit more swirling around, right? So if I take out that, this is very smoothed. But your octaves, if you have more octaves set up, you have more point information. There's more value, there's more noise within the clouds themselves. It's not just a smooth process, right? So in some cases you may want that. It's the same thing with the amplitude. The amplitude is like the edges. It's like how, you know, it has this kind of like jagged edge kind of feel, where this, if you take out your amplitude, it's now, again, smoothed out. But with your amplitude, it's more like it can be within the actual, within the spaces themselves, the smooth spaces, and your octaves kind of worked in tandem with that. But for the most part, your amplitude is a little bit different from your octaves. Your octaves are like within those spaces, it's like an extra layer on top, where your amplitude is more like, it's like the jaggedness or the waviness of your space, right? So if I take this amplitude and bring it down, you'll notice that there's like, this is just very smooth, but if I drag it up on your amplitude, you'll notice that now there's more motion to those areas. Same thing with frequency. Frequency is how much of the space, right? So it like, the frequency is how much the peaks and valleys are, right? So if I take the frequency and I drag it down, you'll notice that there's not as much peaks and valleys, right? So all of these combined together can really change your noise around. And this is not the only thing you can do with your noise. There's plenty of places where you can merge noises together to get even more interesting results. So I would strongly suggest, if you're interested in how this all works, I would strongly suggest learning a little bit more about how noises interact with each other and how you can have them cancel each other out. There's all kinds of interesting things. And I'm going to go through some of those today with this particular patch. However, you know, I just wanted to kind of give you a generalization as to, you know, the importance of noise in those particular cases. Your phase offset is your X, Y, and your Z coordinates. There's really not a Z coordinate within the fractal noise, but actually within wire. Wire is a fractal, or what do they call it? It's a fractal shader, or there's a specific word for it. It's not a vector shader. It's more of a, it's a different kind of shader. Okay. So there are two different types of shaders. There's the vector shaders, and I think it is the fractal shader. I'm drawing a blank on it, but there's two different types of shaders, and wire is that later shading language. It's more based for like changing colors and shapes, less about actually doing three-dimensional space. So in this particular case, your Z axis, there's really not really a Z axis per se. There is an X and Y. You do have a vertical and a horizontal. However, the Z is more like kind of like a W format, I guess you could say, or a W axis, which is a little bit different. It's more of a, it's hard to explain, but for the most part, the best way I can explain it is that in most cases within wire, Z is a good way to give your fractal noise an animation, a smoothing of noise that it just flows and moves, right? And that's the same thing with accumulate. I've added an accumulate here so that it always constantly moves and incrementally moves up in number. But you'll notice that I didn't add it to the Z or the Y. And the reason being is because if I add it to the Z or the Y, it just moves forward up in the Y direction. Or if I add it to the X, it'll move it to the left direction, right? And so it'll just continually move, but you'll notice that the actual areas within the fractal noise do not move themselves. So I'd have to add in the Z in order for those spaces to move. In this particular case, I just want to give it that range of motion where it feels like it's flowing, but not give it a direction of X or Y. In this particular case, I'm not trying to get it to move in a specific direction. I only want it to move in a Z format so that it stays stationary, but there's still a motion to the actual design itself. And I do that because then I can posterize certain areas. Posterize is a very interesting kind of node. It basically dumbs down the amount of values within a space, right? And a lot of these techniques, the fractal noise, for instance, and posterize, these things for me are very familiar. And the reason why they're familiar is because a lot of this comes back from my Photoshop days. I really kind of understand these things because they're in Photoshop, right? Posterize will dumb down any kind of, photograph, or in this case, fractal noise, right? It'll dumb down those spaces into these 4 colors, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, and the white is 4, right? You could actually say that there's actually 5 colors because there's the black itself, right? But if I increase this number, you'll notice that, or increase this posterize, you'll notice that there's less of those fractal spaces. There's only 1, 2, and 3. So there's the white, the gray, and the black, right? So that's the reason why I've added this in and I've posterized it, and it's further down. Is because I want to use this so that I can use my edge detection to detect those spaces. And let me fix this for you just a little bit. So if I drag this down, you'll notice that now I have this line space, right? And what I've done is I've basically edge detect all these areas because the spaces are delineated well enough that there is a clear, you can see the edge of each of these spaces, right? The color. So what I've done is I've actually taken this edge detection, right? And I've added this as a mask to my colorize. My colorize is a little bit different. So I've posterized this space. We're going to go back to here just for a second, because I think this will help out explaining what it is that I'm doing. I've posterized this space, right? And then I've colorized that posterize. So now each space has its own color value. I've added 2 linears that have the color type selected, and I've added in color in values. So then this is what the user sees, and what you can do is you can change these colors to any colors you want, right? So this is orange, this is blue. We could change the blue to a light purple, for instance, so we could change it to a dark purple, right? And we have this value that's joined together, these 4 values. And you'll notice that it says 20. And the reason why it says 20 is because it goes from this purple to this aqua, or cyan, excuse me. It goes from this purple to this cyan in values. So there's 20 values, and it goes from top to bottom, right? And so if I select this, if I highlight my mouse over this and I hit the drop down box, you'll notice that here's all those colors. So there's 20 of them. And I've joined them together with the other 20 from this set, okay? And what happens is when you join them together, now I have 40 colors that are joined from this color to this color, and from this color to this color, from this color to this color. There's no value difference between this color and this color. So if I hit this, let's just do this. I'm gonna select this here, and I select, I select the arrow, and you'll notice if I select through these colors, you'll notice 19, 20, okay? So 19 is the burgundy, and 20 is the purple. But you'll notice that there is no value change. There are no values from this color to this color, okay? So in other words, what I'm saying is there's no gradation change from this color to this color. So what would be smarter to do in this particular set is actually take this one out, okay? Delete this one and add this one to here. And the reason why is because I want my values to go from orange to purple, then from purple to blue, or to cyan, excuse me. So now if I select this, whoop, if I highlight over and then I select my arrows, now you'll notice, let's try that again. Now you'll notice that it goes from orange to purple and then purple to cyan. So now I have a gradation value that's going between the between the colors. And the reason why I want that is because I want a smooth transition from orange to purple to cyan. Where before there was a hard transition from the red to purple. Luckily, the maroonish red color that I had here was relatively close to the purple. So the values weren't a real harsh change. However, if there was a harsh value from this purple to the burgundy, let's say from burgundy to a yellow, there would be a harsh line between the burgundy and the yellow. So that's the reason why I did that. I wanted to make that adjustment. I just noticed that that was there. So there's a mistake on my part. So in any case, you'll see these kinds of things as you go along. You just kind of work through them. You see something that doesn't quite make sense, and you take a look at it and work on it. But in any case, I digress. So now I have these 20 values. I have a color shift here, a color shift option. And what this does is it allows me to shift between the colors. So if I don't like where it's starting, so for instance, I like these color values, but I want the background to be blue or cyan, or if I want the background to be that orange, right? Or I want the background to be that purple. I can't do it here. The reason why I can't do it is because I'm only shifting from -1 to +1. Okay, so if I go this direction, you'll notice it gets close to the purple. So what I could do is it's set to 10 as the negative value, -10. So if I added these two colors, or if I added these together, I have 40 values, and I can only go to -10. So what I need to do is I need to change that. So I'm going to add in a map. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change this value from -10 to -1, and this value to +1. And the reason why I'm doing that, oops, let's see, negative value, my negative value to -1, excuse me, my negative value of minimum of -1, and my positive number of max to +1. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link that to my map, and then I'm going to drag that up to my shift. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to use this map to map this number. So what the user sees is from -1 to +1. But really what I want it to do is I want it to go past those numbers. I want to be able to get to that purple as the background, right? So what I would do is I would probably set something like -30 to +30. And the reason why is because that's going to give me a shift range that is very, very large, right? And it's past the number of, like, so if I go to 40, -40, I will make a full loop around. However, that's not necessary. I can still make that full loop around a -30, I believe. So if I select these through, you'll notice that I should be able to get to that purple. There's the purple right there as the background, right? But if I go back to the opposite side, there it is again, right there. And then if I keep going, there it is again. So actually, I could probably set this to -20 and +20, and that should be enough of a color range. So now I go from -20, which is the purple, to +20, which is the purple. So I've gone from one side of the shift to the other side of the shift. And so that makes sense because -20, or if you were to, if there was not a negative number, 20 and 20 is 40, right? So that makes sense. That's the reason why it's able to cycle through all the colors and get directly to the purple. And then if I started here, here's the purple as well. So that should be enough to make it so that the user can get to where they want to be, basically. And there's probably a way that you could even go shorter than that. You probably could do -10, because what I'm noticing is if I go from -1 to 1, or to 0, right, I get to that purple again. So the reason for that is because my minimum number is 0 and my positive number is 1, but this is set to -1 and 1. This has to be should be the same value as this. So actually, let's change this value instead. I'm going to set this one, this value here, I'm going to change it from -1 to just 0. And the reason being is because then this is in line with this. And so now when I scroll this through, there. So now I only have one purple set at the beginning and end. I only have the purple at the beginning and the purple at the end. There's none in the middle. Okay. I hope that makes sense. But basically this here shifts through all the colors that you've added here, right? So what it does is it takes this orange and it puts it all the way at the end of the 40. And it does it with all the numbers, right? It's not just the 0, right? It's all the numbers here. So it'll start with 0 and it'll go 1 will now be 39, 2 will be 38, so on and so forth, as these cycle through and are added to the bottom of the list, right? That's what the shift does. Okay, so then what we have here is we have the texture from data. You're not really able to see it, but there is an actual line here. It's very, very tiny, and I could probably make that bigger. There we go. You'll notice here is a color shift, right? And actually, does this break it? No, it doesn't. Good. Okay, so this is a good way to kind of show you as to how that's happening. So let's actually go back down here. As I shift this through, you'll notice that it's adding the color that was here to the end of here, and it's cycling through those colors, right? So now we're at the purple to purple edge, and the same thing over here, purple to purple. This is a little bit more accurate as far as what that looks like, right? But what I'm doing here after the texture from data is I'm adding it to the colorize. So I'm actually changing the values here. So the white is the brightest color. So it's saying the brightest color is purple and the darkest color is the turquoise, right? But as I color shift this, it's basically telling it I want to cycle through those colors. So that's how that works. So now that we have that, now that you understand how colorize works, a little bit about this. Let me go back just a little bit. Okay, I'm using a texture from data here, and the reason why is because of how this is set up. This is a color swatch, right? And what I need to do is I need to change it to a texture from data. So I'm basically taking all of my color swatches and I'm making a gradation from those, right? I'm making a value, a color palette, right? And that's where this is connected to, is the palette. So what I did here is the posterize is connected to the colorize. However, what I needed to do is I needed to set my attributes to palette. It's a default to color. I set the attributes to palette, and then what I do is I connect my palette to the palette option. As you'll notice here, it says texture from data output, which is coming from this space here. I hope that makes sense. In order for colorize to work, in order for this to show up like it does, it has to have a palette, which is coming from your texture from data. There'll be certain cases where you'll want to do a shift, or not a shift, a join, but you want to basically have a colorize, right? You would want this as you would want these color values to then be added to a colorize, right? And in those cases, what would happen is your color mode would be color, but then you would have multiple shapes being added into the colorize, which would be chosen in order based on whatever your order is here, right? So it would go from orange to turquoise. Sorry, just a little bit of coffee here real quick. It's getting cold. Okay. Yeah, cold coffee. All right, in any case, let's go back through this real quick. Here's your posterize, right? We're making an edge detection. An edge detection is basically saying that, yep, that's the edge, and how strong do you want it to be? I told it I want a line size, and what I'm able to do is I'm actually able to control the thickness, right, of the line size. This is nothing more than a float here, this option in, it's called a float in. And then what I've done is I've connected to the X and Y of the offset by adding it to a float 2. So a float 1 is going into the X and Y so that both the X and Y values are the same. And then I'm adding that into my simple offset. So as I increase this numbers, you'll notice that the number of the white spaces increases. Now I'm going to go into the mask. It's basically using an alpha mask or a luminance mask in this particular case, but you could use an alpha mask. And the reason being is because there's really just a straight one color here, right? It's just the white. And so I'm basically using that to mask the colors from this. So anywhere where there is white that is coming from this is being is not opaque. It's anywhere where there's white is the color value that I'm getting from this colorize. Anywhere where there's black or transparent is not. It is transparent here in mask. So masks are very, very, very important to learn and understand. I would strongly suggest watching one of my other tutorials that you can find. I'll put a link in the description. It's from from the Click. It was a group that I got together with on Discord. They're an amazing group of people. Jesse is an amazing man. And I did a bunch of tutorials and streamed a bunch of tutorials on his Discord, and he recorded them for me. But I go through masking a great deal in that series. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link in the description. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on up here. So we have this mask, and that's great. That's what gives us this effect. But now what we need to do is we actually need to make this. And how we did this is we actually took what's called a UV texture, which is just a straight a UV texture is a value system. It's basically a way to give you a point of origin. So this goes back to geometry. I don't know if any of you are geometry nuts, or not geometry, trigonometry or calculus, where you actually had a grid system, right? And your value here at the bottom left-hand corner would be basically considered 0, 0, okay? In Blender, the value is usually here in the middle here. There are ways to make that happen. If you're interested in that, just let me know in the comments and we'll talk about it. But there is a way to do that. But in every system that is this fragment shader, geez, crow, I can't believe I just remembered all of a sudden. Okay, so in the beginning we were talking about fractal shaders. It's not fractal shader, it's a fragment shader. This is a fragment shader, and there's vector shaders. Wire is only a fragment shader only. See, I almost did it again. But in any case, what we're doing here is we're actually using the green. I always get this mixed up. The red value is from left to right. Okay, so you go from dark to the red is left to right. That's the Y value. And then the other one is top to bottom, which should be the X value, I believe. And there's a good way you could figure that out. If I come down here and I move this, okay, so your X value is actually, it's the other way around. So the X value is left to right and the Y value is top to bottom. I always get that mixed up. But in any case, what I've done is I've taken this texture and I've mirrored that texture. And the reason why I did this is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that mirror quad and I'm going to polarize it. And then I'm going to add in an oscillating motion. Okay? I've added in this oscillating motion that came from the same space as the accumulate. And the reason why I'm using an oscillator is because I want it to kind of do this breathing, right? I want it to go from 0 to 1, back to 0, back to 1, or 1 to -1. You can do that in your phase, your saw oscillator. You can hit unipolar, and unipolar, if I'm not mistaken, does 0. It does -1 to 1, if I'm not mistaken. one of them does -1 to 1 and the other one does 0 to 1. It doesn't make a negative value. So the saw oscillator does the sine wave, right? It just goes up and it goes down. It goes up and it goes down. And that's what this is giving us here. But what I've also done is I've added in a purlin to that to give me kind of a negative random number. And I've added it to the saw oscillator to make it kind of give me a little bit of a randomness. And the reason being is because I do want it to make those sine waves. I want it to go up and I want it to go down, but I want to give it a little bit of character. And so what I've done is I've added that purlin in to just, it still oscillates, but it kind of randomly oscillates. It's not just a pattern that you can see. I want it to be a little bit unique. I want it to have character. So I've added that into my offset of my polar, okay? And so it cycles through that polar motion, right? You'll notice that sometimes this green seems to move pretty fast and other times not so much. It'll move a little bit slower. And so that's what I've done here is I've actually got it kind of pulsating and moving in and out and slow and fast, right? And then what I've done is I've taken that, sorry, I had to let my dog out, or let my dog in. So what I've done is I've taken that and I've created this polar, and then what I've done is I added it to my UV map. And my UV map is saying, I want to take this mask and bend it using the polar coordinates of this UV map that's been created, this red and green. And it basically oscillates that original mask into this kind of uniformity, kind of oscillating, slow and fast kind of look. Now in this, I have options to actually slide it to make it faster if I so choose to. If I want it to oscillate, but I want that randomness, that's great. But if I want it to be faster so that it still has that randomness to it, but it's still faster, right? It's not as fast or it's not as slow. It gives it this kind of like a quick kind of feel, right? But if I speed it down, I can slow it down. It'll still move at its own pace. It'll plus or minus because of that purlin noise. However, so that gives it that character. However, it is running at a certain slow speed, right? And that's because I've added in this speed option here. You'll notice that I've actually got it kind of mapped out. So this will still be 0 to 1, right? But you'll notice that my minimum value is 0 and my top value is 0.0055. So I use this one because I started out with the accumulate and the fractal noise. That was the first thing I did. So I didn't want my fractal noise to move very fast. However, what I did want to do is I wanted to use this speed universally. So that's the reason why there's a multiply here, is because I'm basically using this as my base to run as my fractal noise speed. However, I also wanted to use that to run my sine oscillator that has that randomness, right? So I set that one to 20 so that it increases that speed of 0.0055. If you were to increase that to 20, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that would be 0.1, right? And so 0.120 is the speed that I'm adding to this polar, right? So if I increased this to, like, let's say 40, you'll notice that it's moving faster, right? And if I were to then increase this exponentially, now you'll notice that there's a great deal of speed there. So that's how you can use the same, connector in multiple times, so that it's not just being used for one thing. You just have to, get creative. How do I get that speed, that polar speed, to be faster? Well, then I multiply that that original number of 0.55 by 40, and so now this increases by that 40x, that 40 factor, right? And so that's the reason why I did that. Here, what I've done is I've used a cheap way of joining a black background to my UV map that I've created. So I've taken those two things and I've joined them together, and then I get this, right? And so I've done that on purpose because I want it to have that black background, so that it has something to, so you have something on the back end to kind of really make this impactful glow, right? So now what I've done here is this is my video mixer to mix my bloom or my glow from the original graphic. So here is the original graphic. I'm basically feeding that into my video mixer, and then I'm saying input it into the blur, so I'm blurring this original. And then what I'm also telling it to do is bloom out that space to make it brighter, right? To brighten that space. And then what I'm doing is I'm feeding that back into itself with using a delay and feeding it back into the video mixer, which creates this glowish kind of mess, right? And as I increase this, you'll notice that as I increase this, it'll start to blow out. So you have to be careful about how you use your bloom, right? You have to kind of mess around with it a little bit. So now you'll notice that it's like there. It's really blowing out those areas which the glow is sticking out, right? You want it to do that a little bit. Bloom is a hard thing to control, especially when you have a blur in front. I like the way the blur looks with the bloom because it helps to fuzz it out to bring out that bloom is still blooming out, right? But it's not as, it gives it this nice texture. This softens the blur softens those edges. Then the bloom helps to brighten up those areas that are bright, bright, bright. And so I like this look. This is something, you know, specific to me. But there are all kinds of ways and all kinds of cool techniques you can use with a delay that'll do all kinds of cool things, right? And as I increase this number, this blur and this bloom will really pop. I don't want to pop it too much. I just want it to just be just enough that it sits on the surface, right? I can increase it exponentially, but as I increase it exponentially, it starts to get really blown out and blurred out, right? So I want it to be just ever so slightly so there's a nice glow edge. Then I run it through a contrast filter, right, to contrast the actual video mixer that's coming through. You'll notice that when I do that, I lose some of the purples and the blues are a little bit off, right? I'm going from the turquoise to the orange. The orange and the light blue, or the orange and the turquoise is like that white space is just being blown out here, right? It's just straight orange and straight white and then straight to the turquoise. And there also is another reason for that. If we go back to here to this texture from data, you'll notice that here we have that transition thing that we were talking about before, where it's going from light blue to orange. You could fix that. The easiest way to fix that would be probably a expand. So what you would do is you would select this, drag it out, and then add in an expand. I double left click to do that, EXPAND, right? And when you add in the expand, I'm not gonna add any additional numbers, and I'm not gonna add to this. You can expand this number exponentially and it'll take this number and expand it out. When you expand something, you're not like adding colors per se. Or, well, actually, I don't know if that's true. I believe what's happening, well, the expand, if you were to expand after a linear, it would expand from this value to this value, right? I'm not sure if that's the same case with a join, but in this case, I'm only using this. I'm not using this to expand the colors. I'm only doing this expand here to use the ping pong option just to see if it will ping pong between the color values, and it doesn't look like it does. I must be doing that wrong. Clamp. All right, let me think about this for just 1 second here. I think it's because there's no number here that's expanding. So if I expand this, if I keep this to 40 and we change this to 10 and this to 10, I believe then it'll expand ping pong. There we go. Okay. So what I've done is I've actually subtracted this and subtracted this to, instead of 20, I only have, or excuse me, as 20 here and 20 here. Now I only have 10 here and 10 here. But then what I'm telling it is to fill that value, those values between the 20 into another set of color, right? So that there's more value. So it's the same thing as having 20 here and 20 here, which would be 40 here. And I'm just basically expanding that to 40 here instead of doing it here. But the reason why I'm doing that is because then I can use the expand to add in the ping pong option, which basically says, I want to go from this value to here, then to here, back to here, back to here, so that it makes this transition from this light blue to purple to orange, back to the purple, back to the light blue, or the cyan, excuse me. So cyan, purple, orange, orange, purple, cyan. And it ping pongs between the two, which will create that value so that there's a dark blue value here, or there's a light blue value. So when I am back here, now you'll notice that there's not a white, it's just, it goes from the orange to the purple to the cyan, right? So it's a little bit more, the values are a little bit more like it's actually choosing the colors between, it's not just going from orange to white or orange to purple directly. It's making a slow transition. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to increase that number just a little bit, and I'm going to bring this orange down, or this contrast down, because as you notice, what happens with the contrast, the brightness and contrast in wire is a little bit different. It actually will, what will happen is as you bring up the contrast, it actually will lighten those colors or darken those colors, right? Because you're lightening and darkening the colors, that's what you want. But at the same point, it's changing the colors, right? So you have to kind of be a little bit careful about how brightness and contrast, how you're using it. Because in wire, it's not directly changing the color brighter. It's actually like making a new color value. It's not going from a light orange or a darker orange of that same color. What it's doing is it's actually turning more red, right? It's not keeping to that value. So that's one of the problems with using brightness and contrast. What I could do is I could get rid of that, but in this case I'm gonna leave it. I'm okay with the way it looks, right? Because it gives it a little extra saturation. I like that. Okay, so we're in the home stretch now. What I've done here is here's where our effects are, basically. Okay, the effects that we have basically take the original, like this is my set here, right? This is the thing that I wanted. This was the original. Now let's play with it. Let's use this as my base, right? As my place to fiddle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make all kinds of effects on this as my base. So here's where we're kind of getting into a little bit more of that. So here what I've done is I've actually taken a static, which is just nothing more than like TV noise, right? And I've added it into the pixelate. Pixelate, what it does is it basically creates these squares, like it'll make them smaller or I can make them larger. And the reason why is because I want this randomness into my mask. And it gives it this, like here is my transform. So what I'm doing is I'm actually feeding this brightness and contrast into my video mixer. Okay, and then in my video mixer, I'm basically saying color offset those colors that are in here. And then what I want it to do is I want it to also go back to this transform. So the video mixer is set to the color offset, and the color offset is set to the switch. Color offset is nothing more than just a color switch or a color change, right? So red is offset from the original, and blue is offset from the original. But here. So let me bring your attention back to this, because I need to. This is a part of that, right? So the video mixer it got a delay, or it's doing a transform. Okay. So what I've done is I've taken the video mixer in. I've basically taken the brightness and contrast, put it in the bottom, just like we did up here, right? We put the join in the bottom, and then we took the video mixer, we input it into the blur, then we input it into the bloom, and then we fed it back into itself on the delay. Same thing here, okay? Same kind of thing. I've got a video mixer, and instead of showing it over here, what I've done is this is going over here to the transform, okay? But you'll notice here's our delay. So it's basically going to the video mixer, going to the transform, so that I can scale it up by 0.015. The scale is set normally by default to 1, but I want it to explode out. As you can see, it creates these edges, right? I'm exploding it out by 0.15. But what I'm doing, if I show this like this, if I take this and I connect it here, okay, that is what you get. It's just basically exploding out. But what I've done is instead, I've actually set this transform to this mask, which is basically taking this pixelate and it's making this mask. So there's cut out areas in here, because all the places where there's black are transparent. All the places that are white are this value here. Okay, as they come across, as these come across these values, they eat into those areas where there's black. Where there's white, you can see them fully, right? But any value that is gray is halfway see-through, right? Anywhere where there's light gray, you could almost see it perfectly. That's the power of a luminance mask. And then what I've done is I've taken that luminance mask and I've connected it into the delay, which creates that stretching that we had in the original, which was this one, right? Which is this. This is what you're seeing here. However, it's not the full, it's only these edges. So as you can see, this is stretching out. But as it disappears from this pixelate, it creates this kind of empty cutout of areas. Now, what I could do is I actually could connect this time to change the static, right? I could create like a play. It's a transport play, I think it is. Transport play, right? Nope, not that one. It's the transport. It's the other one. Transport time. Yes, this one. Transport time, I could set it to bars, seconds, and beats. I could set it to seconds, but it's going to be crazy. Nope. Oh, right here. I got to push the play button, right? And so now I get this static, and now I get this, right? And then when I go here, this is the kind of mess that I end up with, which is kind of cool, right? I may want this, and it's set to 32 pixels, right? But I could actually even shrink this down, so now you even have like more pixels. So you get this kind of crazy hazing that's going around, or you know, stereoscopic edges in these certain areas because it's blowing it out of the space. So I really like how that creates that. And all I did here is set a transport time, right? As your video is playing within Resolume Arena, it will basically, in beats and seconds, or time in seconds, as this is being used as its as a source. As it's playing, it will do this on its own. And so then we get this color, we get this video mixer. This is the kind of effect that's the original, right? And what I've done is I've added this into a color offset, which offsets the color. I could make this even bigger so you can really see the difference, 20. It's hard to tell here, but because it's going, okay, so here's a good example. So here's what it looks like without the color offset, and here's what it looks like with the color offset. Because the colors are red and turquoise and blue, it's kind of hard to see because we're using the color offset of red and the color offset of blue. We can fix that though. If I change this to a white value, let's try that again. If I change this to a white value, if I change this to a gray value, and if I change this to, we'll do another white value, you'll notice that now there's this green and purplish kind of look, and that is actually coming from that's coming from the color offset, right? So if I change this to 10 and 10, you'll notice that it's more black and white now. If I change this to -10, it's kind of, I don't know if you can see it. We can even make it even larger so you can see it, -20. Right now you're getting this kind of stereoscopic look, right? So you have these red edges and this light blue edge or cyan edge. That's the color shift, right? Our color offset. I could change this to 20 and it'll be even, you know, so now you have even bigger blue edges. I kind of like that. We'll leave that. Okay, so then we're going to go back to, let's say, orange. We'll go to, let's go blue, and we'll go pink. Maybe not those colors. Let's go red, let's go blue, light blue, and red. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's go to this area and talk a little bit about how this is working here. So I have this effect, right, which is the color offset, and it's set to this switch. You'll notice that, hey, I went to the switch and you don't see that anymore. And the reason why is because here's my switch, and I have a switch that switches between these three different effects and the normal, which is just this straight, right? It's case number 0, and as it's the value, the switch value is set to 4, so I have 4 different cases. And when this changes here are my 4 different values. Here's value 0, value 1, value 2, and value 3. When you're using a fragment shader, you always start with a 0. In most cases, when you're doing different values, your 0 is your 1 value, and then it incrementally increases. So even though this says 3, it's technically 4 because you started off at 0. Okay, and that's this thing here. So I'm basically telling it, take these values, and when I hit this drop down box and I change it to pixelated, use this color offset because that's this one, and it's filtering it in from the switch into the texture out. And there are 3 different values, right? So I have the color offset, dither creates this kind of effect, right? It creates this kind of weird spotty kind of look. And then I also have displace, which creates this, right? And as I increase this number, it creates this dithering effect. I thought that was interesting. I like the way that looks. Gives it this kind of chroma feel. So that's pretty much it. I hit displaced and you'll notice it goes to this one, right? And that's how it looks. Now you'll notice that, okay, well, Jake, why is it that these two don't move like this one does? And the reason being is because the video mixer is connected to only the color offset. It's not connected to the dither or the displace. Those are both using just straight brightness and contrast, or from that normal, from this point of this demarcation point, right? This is the final output for this, and it's going into the dither and into the displace. This is a float in. I'm basically using this to increase my value of the displace, the threshold, right? And then in this one, the dither, it's just a straight number. It's not a, I could in theory, like I could have something that changes the mode. But really there's not really a good reason to do that. I think just the dither just by itself is fine. I don't think that changing between 2, 4, and 8 in this particular case makes a big enough difference. So that's a pretty much a rundown as to how this all works and how I was able to get it all together. There's not much to this patch, really. When it comes down to it, it's all of this in the foreground, and then this is just extra fluff, right? This is just tinkering with some of the different options that you have in Video Mixer. So when you double left click, here are all your nodes, right? If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll notice you have video effect and video source. So there's some really nice ones to play around with in here. You could do dot screen is kind of interesting, right? You could, in theory, just connect that to dot screen, and then you could change your scale. So now you have this kind of like halftone pattern, right? You could change your angle of it so that it's slanted instead of straight up and down, and you could change your saturation. So that's kind of neat. You could do hatching, video source, video effect. It's hatch, I believe, hatched. And hatching is, or hatched is just a hatched pattern, right? So now you get this kind of like look. And then the only thing with this one is it's basically creating a black and white, which is good actually, because there's ways you could use that. You could change your density. You could increase it or decrease it, right? The of lines that you're using, and the levels can be modified if you so choose to, or you could invert it, right? The reason why this one's interesting is because you could actually use this as a mask. So if I go back here, we were talking about the masks before. You could plug your mask in. You could plug your original here, and then click this as your mask, and so now you get this pattern, right? So that's kind of cool. And then you could join that with a solid color, a black solid color. Change this to black. So there's no end to this circus. You just have to figure out how they all connect together, right? So you get this hatched pattern, and you could change the levels, and I could increase that so that it gives you, this looks very similar to the, in my opinion, this looks very similar to the dither. Well, maybe not so much. But you could change it, right? You could go in here to your density, your levels. You could drag this down, your density. You could even drag your levels down, right? So that you get this kind of pattern. And so now you get this look. But it's all just about playing around, figuring out what works for you. Saturation could be brought down in this one. You could use this one as a mask, although I don't know why you would use that if you've already got a saturation level here, right? You're going to get the same effect if I plugged this in as the black and white for the mask, unless I did something to this before I connected it to the mask, like blurred it or something else. There's all kinds of ways you could use this. And then, so if I liked this look, I could connect it to this switch by basically just adding in another connection, right? So 5 is my size, although you'll notice that as soon as I did that, it disconnected them all. So you have to really like then reconnect everything. So now I have 4 values, size value. So then what you need to do is change this value to 5, like that, and then increase your numbers, right? So then you have 4 for 1 and 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then this one has, so this one is those values. My maximum count is 5, my options count is 5. And then here is my switch. I have 5 instances, right? Or 5 is the size of the switch. And so now what I can do is I need to go here to my label, and we'll just call this halftone, like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reconnect all these. So case 1 was normal, so that's from here. This one is the color offset. Because I put them all in order, so then I just gotta reconnect them like that. And then my next one is this one, right? And I'm gonna plug it in here. So something just real quick, something I learned, your join is a little bit different from your video mixer. Your join is just a straight join between 2 different options, and in some cases you'll want to do a merge after. To merge is like is very similar to Photoshop. It's like merging layers, right? You want them to be all in the same layer. You want them to be a certain resolution. You have multiple shapes, right, that show up as a 3, right, or is the instances or inputs, or is the amount that you have, right? If you put them in a merge, it no longer adds it's no longer 3, it's just one big piece, right? Most of the time, I try my hardest to do that at the very, very, very end. So that's pretty much it. Now I have this kind of look, right? And I hit normal, hit halftone, and there's the halftone. That's not halftone. That's my hatched. That's not the dot screen. So actually, let's plug this one in. There we go. So now I have halftone, displaced. Not much difference there, actually. That's interesting. Oh, is it because... No, that's plugged in. Displaced, halftone. Maybe because... so what's happening here is that when I go to halftone, it's the same pattern as displaced, and it's probably because these two values are the same. No, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 case values. Options count 4. There we go. So now it's the right amount. So now if I hit displaced, dithered, pixelate, normal. But actually it is 5 values. So I'm not sure. Let's try it again. Option 4. There we go. So now I have halftone. That was the reason why I did have 5 options. Again, 0 to 4, that's 5 options. That's the reason why I went halftone. Sometimes you just have to just think something through. Okay, that was probably a little bit longer than it needed to be. I apologize if I've bored you to tears. Thank you if you've made it this far in this little mini tutorial, or long tutorial, an hour long. If you have any questions, or if you really actually do like this kind of thing, let me know. I'll try to make more of these tutorials and go through patches and explain how the patches work and how I'm doing them. Thank you very much for your interest. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, concerns, leave them in the comments and I will read them promptly and I will respond. Thank you again very much for your interest, and I appreciate your time, and you be sure to have a great day.